Hello, and welcome to AA Beyond Belief, the podcast. I'm your host, John S. In today's episode, we'll speak with Larry Kay from the Agnostic group in Toronto, Ontario. Larry recently settled a case brought before the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal, a case against the Greater Toronto Area Intergroup, for delisting agnostic AA groups from the meeting directory in Toronto. The settlement was a success for the agnostic groups. They're back on the list. A victory for Alcoholics Anonymous, and a victory for widening the gateway to recovery for all, regardless of their belief or lack of belief. Larry, thank you very much for joining us here on AA Beyond Belief.
Well, you're welcome. I'm really delighted that we could get together today.
Yeah, this is what I consider happened with the settlement of the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal case. I consider that a historic moment in Alcoholics Anonymous, and particularly for us secular people in AA. And I think it'll be nice to have this documented for history.
Well, that would probably be a good thing to have some sort of a reference about what's happened.
Yeah,
it's certainly been good news for many of us, and I think for all of us, really, in the big picture of things.
I think so. I think it's good for AA overall. Let's start from the very beginning. Let's start from the creation of the agnostic groups in Toronto.
Okay.
And how long were you guys meeting before there was a problem, and how did things go when you were first starting out?
Well, things were going quite well. We probably met for pretty much a year before things sort of went, we'll call it run amok. Part of that time, though, was just a small clutch of us getting together to try to figure out the meeting and the 12, an alternative version of the 12 steps, and among other things, and then waiting for a room to come available. I don't remember exactly when we began the early part of that process, but it certainly was before our first meeting.
So when you guys were starting out, you immediately had the idea of coming up with an alternative version of the 12 steps.
Well, it wasn't really coming up with a new idea to do that. I mean, quite frankly, I had, when I came into recovery in the early 90s, I, right off the get-go, had a copy of an alternative 12 steps that had been used in the Chicago area for many, many years.
Oh, really? So
there was nothing new about it.
Okay.
It was just a question of coming up with something that worked for us, that we were comfortable with. And, the reality is most of us, if we were to have a meeting and we would discuss the 12 steps even today, the alternative ones, we would still have troubles with agreeing with what's been said. I mean, there's concepts that just doesn't matter what you say, we're not going to agree with it. Self-will and following others' will or giving will up,
right,
is a concept that is very difficult for most people to have.
Right.
Well, mostly because I don't think it can actually be done.
Yeah.
You can't give up your will. So
no, you're right. And I can also understand how it would be really difficult for a group to come up with an agreed upon, steps. I mean, they had a hard time with it in the very beginning, but you guys did. Sure. So you started meeting, and so from your first meeting, you had this the alternative steps that you were reading at your meetings.
Well, we were working on them. Yeah. Well, from our first meeting at Beyond Belief in September. We had an alternative plan that we talked about, that, and we credited to the fact that it was amended from the original 12 steps.
Yep.
It was an accommodated language is what we were doing. We were accommodating ourselves because the other language is, for the most part, is not really acceptable to some people in certain circumstances.
You're right. It's not. In fact, that is one of the most common questions that we get from a newcomer, somebody who's been in AA, who's not a believer, and they'll come to our group and they say, how do you work these steps? And even newcomers who have never had any experience with AA, who are non-believers, they look at those steps with God written all over them. And it's hard, if you haven't had some experience, to figure out how to interpret those things.
Oh, yeah. And it's worse if you have a negative experience. So, which I think a lot of us do. So using that, using the original language is extremely difficult. And you do need to have a way of understanding it. It's like translating it into another language. Mm-hmm. You have to have it put into a form of reference that is effective for you.
Yeah.
And sometimes you have to just discard the whole thing as a concept. And that's okay too. I mean, I've known an awful lot of people in the program over the years, and nobody works them in the same order. They don't work them in the same way. They don't have the same understanding. I mean, if you go into a traditional meeting that is a step meeting, John, and I'm sure you've done this many times in a step meeting, everybody goes around and they discuss what this step means to them. This is exactly the same process that we went through and have to go through. We have to articulate it in that meeting, what that meaning is for us. And we share that with others so that others can get an idea of things. It's not about indoctrination. It's about grabbing it and understanding it for you. And it has to come out that way as opposed to exactly as written, because it has to have meaning for self. And so it has to come out of your own lips, and it has to be said in a sincere way so that you can understand it. And I think if we listen to what we say in those meetings, we get a better understanding of what it is that we're reading and looking at for ourselves, and only for ourselves, not about for anybody else.
Right. Yeah, that's it is kind of a unique individual experience how we choose to interpret the program, and that's the one amazing thing about AA is a lot of people outside of that program don't realize that so much attention is given to individual liberty in AA. It's not a top-down hierarchy where you must follow these precepts and do these things exactly as so, but the individual is given total freedom, and the groups are really the ones in charge of how they choose to carry the message to the newcomer. Right. No, absolutely. That's the way it's set up and always has been. Yep. Two or more unaffiliated, no requirement for conformity, and complete autonomy. Yep. And if I don't like it, John, I'm getting myself a new coffee pot and starting another meeting. Exactly. Exactly. And I think about how many times has that been done? 111,000 times. And if you're going to be a special purpose group for agnostics and atheists, and these are the people that are going to come to your meetings, then it makes sense that you're going to help them interpret those steps. So how long, Larry? And I know the story from Roger that the understanding with the Greater Toronto Area Intergroup was that you could read these steps, provided that there be some sort of a disclaimer or notice that these are not the original steps, but an adaptation or interpretation of. And how long did you guys do that? Well, I don't remember that was ever there at all in the original part. Oh. As a matter of fact, no, that wasn't a requirement. That was something that we chose to do on our own. Ah. In terms of just acknowledging that they were, adopted from. Gotcha. And that was in the first meeting. That was beyond belief. We agnostics didn't do it at all. We use the Quad A version off the internet from a million years ago. Wow. I had no idea that Quad A did that. There was it was in an old email. I've had email a long time. So, I mean, I just happened to, been able to pull that out of an old alt.recovery group. Back in the days of, those kinds of email groups and things like that. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so we didn't do ours the same at all. They did. There's no requirement to say that. I mean, the only thing that happened with this case is that we have to make a decision, and we're quite unique. It's only in the Toronto area, Greater Toronto area, and it's a requirement on their website form for when you're filling out your membership, because you do it yourself.
you either have to acknowledge or adopt, and it's just either one or the other, and that's what we do, and that's all we have to do.
And that was a result of the settlement.
I could change the steps tomorrow if we had a business meeting.
Sure.
Just to change the wording around because somebody's feeling, uncomfortable with the language, and there's still language that we say that's uncomfortable.
Form that's on their website now where you accept or adopt, was that as a result of the settlement?
That's a very good question. I don't actually know the answer to that question. That would be an internal internet thing. When we went into mediation, the wording that is on the website was provided to us as part of our, is this going to be okay? And, they had pulled some information from the Quad A's in Chicago. I think because they had a fairly substantial site, they had some wording and they'd worked it around a little bit. But it was certainly different than what the requirement was in their operations and guidelines.
Yeah.
Their procedures and guidelines document. And that was the change because that was not acceptable.
So how long were these groups meeting, Larry, before it became an issue?
Well, we were beyond belief for at least 2 years or coming up to 2 years. And we Agnostics coming up to its first year. And then in May, something happened. I think we had heard maybe a month or so before that letters had been written to New York by one of the local groups. And the reply had come back that they were being advised that they should just take their own inventory.
Really? And
the problem is some people may have, taken that advice to heart, but some didn't. And word went up the street to other groups, and there's sort of a rallying cry that we wanted to get rid of these people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and they did. They put a motion on the floor. We learned about it, and we showed up. The first time I showed up at an intergroup meeting as a representative was, of course, the last time that I showed up at the intergroup and was allowed to show up at intergroup.
Wow. So there was they voted to not just delist the groups, not just to remove the groups from the meeting directory, but to push the groups out of the intergroup altogether, saying that you are no longer part of the Greater Toronto Area Intergroup of Alcoholics Anonymous, and you have no voice here.
No, that's not quite true.
Okay.
They voted to delist us.
Okay.
There was an attempt in the meeting to change the wording of the motion to not include my group. It was denied by the director. They couldn't change that motion. If they did, they would have to come back another month, and it was an emergency because they had to get the new list to the printers because they were out of books. So there was this false urgency of we've got to make a decision now. It's got to be what is there. We can't change it. You see, my group did not have a web page.
Okay.
And so we were lumped into the motion along with Beyond Belief. Beyond Belief had a web page on. They had gotten permission from the board, the directors at Intergroup, to put up this page that had their alternative steps. And that was fine. That offended a lot of people, apparently. That was all part of this. But we were never asked to take it down or to amend it or to change it. They just voted to delist us. Now, that's the delisting. That passes, though it was tight. If you add those that would, I'm going to say, correctly abstain because you should not have an opinion on this issue, and those opposed to the motion were equal to the numbers that wanted to kick us out. Now, that was in terms of delisting. What happens behind the scenes is after the meeting closes, the board of directors removes us from the database and then takes the position that we are no longer eligible to speak on the floor. So they took away the membership afterwards, and they refused us entry into meetings.
Gosh.
I was not permitted to talk on the floor I wasn't allowed to even go in the room when they were having their big debate about relisting us. So I couldn't even put a case forward. Our friend John M was the only voice that we had
on an emotional level. I mean, I know that Toronto is much bigger than Kansas City, but the AA community in Kansas City, I just feel like I know everybody, that it's almost like family, and it would be hard to imagine going to our intergroup and being told that we're not welcome. Do you have that same sort of community feeling there in Toronto within Alcoholics Anonymous? And on an emotional level, what was it like to have this issue with your intergroup?
Well, I did have that connection. I certainly knew probably half of the people in the room, had seen them around or knew them personally. It was extremely difficult. I don't know if you've ever been shunned in a formal way. Mm-hmm. But when you're conscious of the shunning and the reasons for the shunning, it is an extremely profoundly painful experience. It is very difficult, and I've been through these kinds of experiences in my life before, and that's one of the reasons why I got engaged in the was willing to pursue this all the way down the line. Mm-hmm. I mean, I gave a lot of room, a lot of margin, because I didn't want to go there.
Right.
But, I was never going to acquiesce. That is not something I was ever going to do. I know what that's like to do, and it's not an acceptable thing here.
No. It would be an enormously painful thing. And there's actually, there's still intergroups, at least in the United States, and I believe in Canada that still don't list groups. Isn't that right?
That's right. Yeah.
That's still happening. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, going back to the delisting, weren't there 3 groups that were delisted?
Well, there were 2 groups delisted, and then there was a relisting motion and a debate about 6 months later, because they have these 6-month rules in Intergroup to sort of slow the arguments down, right? And just, it's an artificial break. Mm-hmm. And at that time, there was a second motion to remove this new group that had started, or to delist them. And they sent out the AA police.
Right.
And, there's a sort of an assurance was put on the floor a week or so ago that, AA doesn't have police. No, but Intergroup does.
Right. No, they do check on groups.
Well, they are a different organization. They're not a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. They think they are, but they're not. And
they're not.
So they operate differently, and it causes some grief, because people don't understand that there's some fundamental responsibilities that are different.
Yeah, it's really weird. Intergroups are set up by the groups. They're outside of the service structure of Alcoholics Anonymous.
Right.
But they still sort of, in a way, they still work with AA World Services and GSO.
They absolutely do. Mm-hmm. And they have an operations and procedures guideline. Like there's a contract there between them. Mm-hmm. And an understanding. There is a connection, but they are separate in terms of the other side of it. They have some responsibility, but they are separate. Right. And this was part of the case in the hearing in the preliminary stages.
Yep. Now, the actual reason for removing the groups, was it because of having the steps read at the meetings, or having the steps posted on the website? And only one of the groups had a website.
Yeah.
What was
the answer? The answer to the question is, it was one of the above, only one of the above, and then all of the above. Mm-hmm. There was never anything unrelenting about my group, even though my group it was just because of its name.
Right.
Because we hadn't distributed anything to anybody. We'd only had our own meetings with, our own members. Nobody had come to visit us.
Right.
We weren't putting anything on a website.
Right.
So we were just delisted because we were, guilt by association.
Right.
And Bob's your uncle. Mm-hmm. And, the other group got delisted because they were policed directly. Ours was policed afterwards.
Was that the Richmond Hill group?
The Richmond Hill group. Mm-hmm. And ours was policed as well by the same characters. And of course, quite rude while they were in the meeting.
Right. It was only Beyond Belief that actually had steps written and read at the meetings. That I know that Richmond Hill did not read those steps in their meetings, and I guess your group didn't either.
Well, we did. We had our own alternative version. It was like I said, this old version.
That's right.
And yeah, so what?
Yeah,
that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. The thing that drew the fire was the fact that they had posted it on the website, I think.
Yeah. Okay.
There's this big red herring that we were trying to change the steps. We're not trying to change the steps. We have never been trying to change the steps. What we've been trying to do is to accommodate the steps in such a way that individuals can understand them.
Yep.
And it's we don't want to change it. It's not going to affect any other group in all of AA. It doesn't. It only affects my group, and it's our way, and we've agreed to it. And if we don't like it, we'll opt to adjust it again.
Yeah.
We're just trying to keep the, alcoholics so that they have an opportunity to get sober.
Yep. So how did the suit come about? What made you decide to go this route? And did you try any other remedies first?
Oh, I tried lots of remedies prior. Well, first of all, in the first meeting that we had, the first vote, the Intergroup rep from Beyond Belief was also there. And there were several others that we made presentations as we were allowed, and which is appropriate. It was brought to the attention of Intergroup that this was potentially a human rights violation to discriminate on the grounds of creed. Right. And that caused a horrible backlash in that meeting with catcalls and boos and chants, and it was a horrendous thing. But it was required to point that out. Sure. So at least before the vote occurred, they were aware that there was this potential risk. Right. I've never wanted to go down this path, but I did try calling and writing emails and staying in contact. And I had one phone call back a couple of months later because we'd been cut out of a meeting. The other rep was allowed to represent the groups, but they would not speak with me directly. Mm-hmm. I don't know why. It's not a person that I knew, but did not want to speak with me and would only speak with the other person. Totally insulting for our group. But I did finally get a phone call, and I stated what needed to be stated. It's against the law to do that. You just put us back. That's it. And then I started doing some other things and staying on top. I spoke with my cousin, who is a labor lawyer out in the East Coast, and she was in town in Toronto, going up to the cottage, and so we had a little meeting together, and she told me that I just have to document absolutely everything and start writing and establish, this kind of pressure and questioning and just dog them, in a sense. And that's what I did. And hopefully trying to get them to have some, let's say, some extra eyeballs look on it. There were some pretty serious things that were amuck in the minutes and with some other things, and I documented that, and sent off emails about that, some registered letters, requested accommodation. Finally, I couldn't get them to hire a lawyer. Yeah, to go and look at that. They would not hire a lawyer. Now there's so many members in AA that are lawyers that could have done something, but they really needed an arm's length lawyer. Mm-hmm. Somebody who isn't wrapped up in the dogma and the dogmatic parts of the program, who can see clearly. But they wouldn't do that. And it went on. Then I finally got a response from my request for accommodation, and that sort of took me for a loop where they pointed the finger directly at New York and said that this is all a part of the core tenets of Alcoholics Anonymous, and we cannot accommodate you on those reasons. So isn't that interesting? They basically took the religious stance at that point. And did you contact New York GSO? Yes, I did. Okay. What happened with that? Well, before this happens, sadly, I have a heart attack shortly after getting that letter. and I needed to take some downtime and recover, which I did. Other people were on the case anyway. I mean, keeping the pressure up. But I had to get over that, and then I got back into it again, and eventually I followed up with that letter and sent a letter of requesting accommodation off to New York, which was never responded to. I don't know if that was, they get a lot of letters, they get a lot of stuff in. Things could have gotten lost. Who knows? I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt in my mind.
That's kind of you, because they're pretty professional over there, and I'm pretty sure they saw that letter. Okay. But I'm just guessing.
Anyway, it was sent. It was registered. It was, because that's the appropriate way of doing things, and it didn't get responded to. And the letter basically said, look, this group seems to think you need to change your tenets to accommodate the Human Rights Code in Ontario. Which is a little bit tongue-in-cheek, except that really that's what was being said by the other party. I think they recognized it was violating it, but they said they couldn't because it was New York's responsibility. Well, it's totally a straw man kind of an argument. I think in legal terms, I would say it's sort of ultra vires. Like they were trying to enforce something that is only enforceable by the other organization. Well, you can't do that, and it's passing this buck line. Anyway, but it caught me up because I have to deal with New York, and this is not. They haven't done anything. Their stuff's pretty clear. They've got these very, very solid traditions. When applied properly, everything's good to go.
Right.
It's only when you don't apply them, and this was now problematic. Anyway, we just continued down the merry way. There was a change, of course, a couple of times of who the directors were, and which was a hopeful thing always. That you're hoping that the next director and the next board would be more accommodating. And indeed, we had, I think, a softening with one of the directors, and we were having conversations. He came to our meetings, we talked to him, and he did try to accommodate us. He put our names finally into the binders at 234, which is the number, the street number, which is referred to as the office, where the phone bank is and all of that stuff. And just like NA is and CA is and Al-Anon is and ACA is and the OA is and all of these other treatment helpful contact numbers. And so our groups were put into those binders as for extra. Well, and that was fine until they were then ripped out and pulled out. And,
wow.
So we didn't even have the standing of a treatment center or a hospital or anything like that, or Al-Anon.
Right.
That was a problem. And he told us about this, that it was pulled out. He didn't pull it out. Somebody else did.
Getting back to GSO a little bit, I know this part of the story, and I've read it on Agnostic, I believe, that the Intergroup was originally given kind of like an okay or go ahead to delist the groups from an employee at GSO, Mary Claire, right? Didn't she say, or somebody at GSO said, yeah, throw them out?
Yeah, no, it doesn't work quite that way. First of all, somebody had written a letter originally saying, you don't take another group's inventory.
Right.
Okay, that was the first letter.
That was the very first thing. So you guys take your own inventory.
Then there was some kind of a consultation to Mary Claire, and she sent back a letter saying we don't endorse anybody changing the steps. Well, she backtracked that and corrected it.
Right.
But they had published her letter in the local, newsletter that we had that went out to everybody.
Okay.
And so that was before the vote. So that damaged this was in the relisting. Okay. That really damaged everything.
Right.
And then she sent a retraction, but they would not publish that.
Gotcha. Okay. So they
did later, but it wasn't with enough time. And
right. Because GSO will normally say, at least like when I was talking to my area delegate about the situation in Toronto, and he says, listen, as you and I just said, the intergroups are totally separate from the service structure. There's nothing that GSO can do per se to make a intergroup fall in line. But what was happening in this case, if I understand you right, Larry, is the intergroup was actually trying to pass the buck to GSO, saying, "Hey, we're just doing what the guidelines say to do." Is that what
they were trying to get? They were trying to get GSO to endorse a different position than they hold.
Okay.
And inadvertently sort of got that accidentally.
Okay.
So what I have seen, I mean, it was certainly available in the whole course of things. I've seen a typical letter addressing this issue from New York, and what they do in their letters, as a general rule, when they have these kinds of crises or issues, and they're dealing with intergroups or central offices, is they just communicate their experience. They don't put a judgment on it at all. It's just, this is what we know has happened in the past. This is what other groups have, done in the past. And this or that or this. And that's fine unless the action that's taken is something that's, illegal or unlawful or whatever. Mm-hmm. And I mean, and that was the case in our situation.
So when you filed the complaint, it was filed against the Greater Toronto Area Intergroup and also to AA World Services and GSO, or was it just AA World Services?
Okay, well, I'll correct how that works.
Okay,
I was telling that story originally about having that stuff taken out of the binders. Mm-hmm. The next thing that happened when having a conversation in June was that we were going to have a motion on the floor. This was the time when the new pamphlet had come out, Many Paths to Spirituality.
Oh, okay.
And because that had finally been passed, it was promising. It happened in the spring. We were hoping with the release of that pamphlet that would coincide with a motion to relist. Mm-hmm. And I was promised that would happen. That did not happen. Mm-hmm. And I gave them 90 days of time, and then I had to file. Now, the rules of filing these applications is a little bit, remember, I'm not a lawyer, so mm-hmm. I go digging into all of the background stuff about filing these things, and it's available online and doing research. And the thing is that you have to hit the common denominator, the highest common denominator, when you're serving an action. And so it was hard to figure out this cluster of participants. AA World Services holds property in Canada, but they don't make decisions. The General Service Board makes decisions and owns AA World Services. Toronto Intergroup causes the problem, but defers all of the responsibility to the 12 steps, the 12 traditions, mm-hmm. the 12 concepts, which is all owned by AA World Services, mm-hmm. but under the control of the General Service Board. Anyway, the owner, the highest common denominator is AA World Services. Mm-hmm. And so I because that's the name of this organization, is Toronto Intergroup of Alcoholics Anonymous. And that's how it's registered on the CRA website, which is the charitable thing. And that's only Alcoholics Anonymous can own that name. So I don't know, maybe they're actually owned by AA World Services, because certainly you're not allowed to have that name. Mm-hmm. And that's quite clear in the guidelines. So I filed them and I put that in. I was probably angry at the time I submitted it and was rushing a little bit faster. The conference in Santa Monica was coming up. I wanted to go, and I finally made a decision that I couldn't because I was going to be serving papers. Mm-hmm. I think I was a little angry. So I just put their name in there. Mm-hmm. And then I think a couple of weeks later, I made a motion to add the other two parties, mm-hmm. Which delayed some of this mm-hmm. Process, because that caused the preliminary hearing to be the way it was. And that's when people started arguing who's in line and who's responsible and who's in what jurisdiction and so on and so forth.
And you were acting as your own attorney?
Yes.
That's pretty amazing.
Well, not an attorney. I was just acting as
a person. Yeah.
Just myself.
As a citizen,
There are self-represented cases in the tribunal system.
Okay.
It's designed so that when certain things go wrong, that can happen.
Oh, okay.
and they do make accommodation to those of us who are not. But it does get a little bit tricky at a certain point when putting forward evidence. I do not have the authority that a lawyer does. So, and I don't have the expertise to do that properly. And the judge is or the adjudicator is well aware of that. And there's things that they can do to accommodate. It just makes the process look a little different.
Okay.
So that's and the rules of cross-examining people, things like that.
So when you filed the complaint, am I correct that the initial defense of the intergroup was that to be a member of the Greater Toronto Area Intergroup of Alcoholics Anonymous, you must believe in God and practice the 12 steps as written?
Well, let's get to there's two parts to that.
Okay.
The first defense that came forward didn't exist. They missed their deadlines. They were not legally allowed to submit or provide a defense at all, because you have to provide responses in a timely fashion, and you're given a great deal of time to do that. And they missed their deadlines. So in the first hearing, towards my application, they were not allowed to provide any kind of a defense whatsoever. They did have argument over, because Phyllis had shown up and testified, they did have an argument over whether or not they were a part of the general service structure. They really felt they were a part of the service structure. And in her testimony that was submitted, they were clearly not a member of AA. And so this became an argument between the two lawyers that were there. It got a little bit rough. It was interesting to watch.
Yeah, I bet.
Because that really was their only line, was the fact that they were acting on AA's behalf, of course, which is in violation of the concepts. So, but how do you bring a lawyer up to speed on the concepts? I
know that's the thing.
I don't think you can bring an intergroup board of directors up to speed on the concepts. So
it's kind of funny. They have like Vatican lawyers. They should have like AA lawyers.
Yeah, exactly. Well, they need it because it's so complicated.
It is.
But no, the responsibility for all of these things goes to the General Service Board. That is where the responsibility lies. It can't go anywhere else. The concepts only affect the General Service Board.
Right.
They're the only ones that are in line with it and have any, it has only meaning. Why it's a requirement for me in Toronto, or why it was going to be a requirement for us in Toronto to follow the 12 concepts, is crazy. Not in an intergroup set,
Right.
I mean, that's absolutely ridiculous. And to force me to do something that I'm actually in the concepts and cannot be forced to do is even just more ludicrous. But that's, anyway, no, I don't want to get started on some of those little vicious circular arguments that were happening. Anyway, so that happens. It was in the second hearing, the summary hearing.
Gotcha.
Where they basically made a statement that it was, they had the 18A exemption. And that there was a requirement in belief in God that to be a member of their organization. Right. And probably when AA went dead silent and couldn't believe it. It was the longest silence I ever heard in my life.
What was that like? Were you on the phone with the parties?
Yeah, it was a conference call. The summary hearing was a conference call. And so you have four parties that are online. I was asked to present. I presented. Then AA had their little bit, which wasn't much. They basically endorsed my position.
Okay.
And then Toronto Intergroup had their thing that they did their presentation, and that's when that was presented. And AA went silent. I was absolutely stony silent, and I broke the silence. I said, "It's the first time I've heard of it."
Wow.
Because it really was the first time I'd heard of it.
Yeah, I couldn't believe it when I read it.
Yeah.
And is it because the intergroup wasn't paying attention to what their lawyers were doing, and their lawyers probably looked at all this AA material and says, "Oh yeah, this is easy. This is a religion. We're going to go for the religious exemption and get out of this." And was the intergroup just not paying attention, or did they really believe what they were saying?
Well, I have to tell you, I would like to believe. I would like to believe that it was a lawyer's decision to go that way.
Okay.
But I don't know that I can believe that. And I'll tell you why I don't know that I can believe that. Of course, I'll never know the exact truth. But the second response that came with the new lawyer, remember, this lawyer was no longer with the case after that. Mm-hmm. They then hired another lawyer from a much larger firm and brought up to speed. And in their response to that first judgment or that first ruling, again they extended the 18A exemption as their fifth primary point of argument, the be all end all argument that will end this whole thing.
Yeah.
And so no, I don't think that that's necessarily. I think they were getting some guidance from behind the scenes on this.
Okay.
So yeah, that's my belief. I don't with absolute certainty know that, but I can't imagine that it would show up at that point in that response and with two lawyers independently.
Okay.
It doesn't make sense that they would do that on their own.
And at that summary hearing, that's where they decided. That's where the tribunal heard this, I guess, and they decided, okay, this case has merit to proceed.
That's right.
Okay. What happened after that?
Well, after that, everybody had finally on their forms and on the paperwork had checked the mediation boxes. Mine had been checked right at the beginning, but they all had been checked by that point, and we're talking 2 years later.
Wow.
Everybody agreed to try mediation.
Okay.
So it was all about getting people in position to mediate. Okay. And that's when I was then connected with the Human Rights Legal Resource Center.
Okay.
I
found them on the internet, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah. They're there. Mm-hmm. And they are a part of the tribunal, but they're completely arm's length.
Okay.
And so they help people and individuals go through the process to help navigate it. They take over the sticky stuff that requires legal. They would have taken this to trial. And I had been in touch with them before, all the way along. They may have sent me a judgment or something like that I could refer to. But it was always hands off. I think they felt that I wasn't so incompetent.
Yeah.
So, and that's fine. So they were always in the background. And, okay. And so that's when Megan. I got to meet Megan and got things ready, and then we moved into the mediation, and she'd prepared me for that and started. And of course, a half day was provided. We probably could have done it in a full day, but I don't even think we could have done it in a full day.
Yeah.
So it broke off, and then we had a pause, and then sadly, and I mean sadly, the trustee that was representing the General Service Board and was involved, who was from the Kingston area. He wasn't an area delegate at one point, but it became a trustee. He passed away just before Christmas, and it sort of left everybody a bit in a lurch.
Yeah.
And tried to figure things out for January. But anyway, we all got back on track, and we did another half day in January, and we solved it. It was getting a little tedious in the process, but I really didn't. This is just me talking now. I did not want to go to trial. I really didn't feel like that was going to be helpful to everybody.
Right.
So I think this is my philosophy. And if we have a decision like there's 3 or 4 parties here all talking, and we have to come to a mutual decision. I want that where everybody's on side.
Yeah.
And they're in agreement on it in principle, at least, right? I don't want 3 to outweigh the other and say that's the way it's got to be.
Right.
Then that's imposed. It will never fit properly. The shoes will always be uncomfortable. And so I always thought that a mediated settlement was the ideal way of going. And and avoid that lengthy process. I thought there would be way too much. It wasn't the expense or the time.
Right.
I think but the embarrassment
Sure.
that goes along with opening up one's books and activities, and that's on everybo's side,
Yeah, I think you went about this with a lot of sensitivity and care, because I know that you love Alcoholics Anonymous, and
that's why I was fighting. That's why I was having this fight. I mean, I've had fights with my mother.
Mm-hmm.
Love her dearly, always did. But when there's a reason to fight, it's always for their benefit,
right?
Or I just become a passive aggressive. I shut up and I go away. No, this is something worth saving, worth doing, worth fixing, worth helping other people. It may not feel like it. It may feel horrible, but it was done lovingly, including with Intergroup. I used to be a member of Intergroup years ago. So I just think people, and I'm talking about people, not organizations. Now, people can be thick-headed and stubborn, and all of those nasty words are things that I would actually describe of myself. We can all be just like me. So it can be tedious at times, right?
Yeah. So what was the final settlement? How did things finally play out?
Well, I released AA from the settlement.
Okay. AA World Services or General Service Board?
They were not necessary. They'd come to the table. They did what they said they were going to do. I was happy with that. That was enough. They really had been my ally. Whether, the world looks at it or not, they were the ones that endorsed my position about the religiosity, that the AA is not a religious organization. Because they're not. They don't have the objects, or the letters patent, or the, what's the American term would be the, it's an American thing. That's why I don't do it. Articles of incorporation.
Oh, okay.
So the articles or the letters patent are clearly not a religious organization. When these organizations were created, both of them, that was the time for them to register their intent. And, that is the only time that you can do that. I think maybe you can amend them later, but they haven't been amended. So this point was solid. All of the communication to the professional world on the part of AA is all basically, we're not a religious organization. We're, it would, headlines, never religious. There's stuff on every pamphlet that goes over that, all the way through everything they do. They're not religious. They endorsed that position, that argument. That really was the biggest part of it, because that all of a sudden I wasn't yelling at the big guy, I had a bigger guy behind saying, yeah, that's right. It changes the weight of the argument. So they had done their thing. They hadn't been released at that point. I needed to keep them there. I could have released them earlier, I suppose, but I needed to keep them there, for that mediation, just in case, because I thought it would make it easier, and I think it did.
Sure.
And I was happy to let them to release them after the mediation.
Okay.
So that's all settled. The stuff with Intergroup, they agreed. Well, we've made it public. There's been a statement that's been made public. There was the press release was a joint thing that everybody agreed to that. That was fine. So we released that on the 6th. And the minutes of settlement were released to the Intergroup members the week prior, and they were given the extra week to be able to go back to their home groups and talk about what had occurred and what was decided and what was settled, so that they would not be shocked on the media release day if all of a sudden a whole bunch of media popped up. It wouldn't be out of the blue. Nobody'd be shocked and surprised, and that was fine. We agreed to that.
And I see, like what as you mentioned earlier, the basic settlement. When I first read it, I didn't catch this part of it. GTA Intergroup has reaffirmed that any AA group in the Greater Toronto Area that acknowledges or adopts, and I didn't catch that, the suggested 12 steps and 12 traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous can be recognized as a member of Intergroup with the right of representation on the floor of Intergroup, regardless of how their members interpret and apply those steps in their own lives.
Yeah.
So this means that, what do they mean? What do they mean by acknowledge or adopt?
Okay. I'm going to do this tongue in cheek because sometimes you have to sort of be crystal with it.
Yeah.
There is sitting in the middle of your table right now a nice, tall, cold, drenching, perspiring glass of red Kool-Aid.
Mm-hmm.
You can say, that is a nice, refreshing glass of Kool-Aid. Others will say, I need to drink the Kool-Aid.
Gotcha.
And that's the difference.
Yeah. So we can say, yes, there are 12 steps and 12.
That's correct.
Right. Okay.
They do it, and they have since 1939. They've had them. Not from the beginning of AA. They were created, after AA came along.
Right.
And they were amended. And so this is the version they have, but they've been there a long time. And, I acknowledge that.
Right. It's
an important part of the history of AA.
Absolutely.
And it's gone beyond AA. It's gone into how many other fellowships.
Mm-hmm.
It's been extremely helpful. There's no denying that they are important.
Right.
Each language that takes the 12 steps and translates it for their people and their cultures and their smaller communities and the different linguistics. They all have different idioms from each culture throughout the world. I mean, all of these people modify them to a small degree.
Sure.
But we all can acknowledge that there's 12-step process.
Absolutely.
And we can also acknowledge that they're suggestions only.
Yeah.
And some people will work them and some people won't.
Right.
And so there's a whole bunch of things we can acknowledge. Now, on the other hand, you can actually go and embrace them and do them. I mean, I've worked the 12 steps.
Mm-hmm.
I did it using as they were written, but with an agnostic or an atheistic point of view. And I did that years ago. I did that, 20 years ago. I mean, it worked for me. It was helpful.
And if I'm looking at this, we're also acknowledging that it seems to me that the Intergroup has reaffirmed that any AA group may not adopt the suggested 12 steps because it says you can acknowledge or adopt. That would mean some groups might not adopt.
That's
I would
right.
think.
And our group is not adopting them.
Right.
We are absolutely acknowledging them.
Exactly.
And but we are adopting the process. So, I mean,
yeah.
Because that's
well,
important.
Heck, when you read the 12 steps,
that our membership is members of Alcoholics Anonymous. There's a lot of things that we do.
The whole thing is so silly too. When you read the 12 steps, the altered 12 steps, the basic actions, the basic principles are the same as the original steps.
Right.
Yeah. That's what's so crazy about it. But anyway, okay. So
well, yeah, I can't get into that part of it.
Yeah, that's dogma for you.
If I had to say I was disappointed about anything, mm-hmm. and this is not, and you know what, I was happy. I really am.
Bet.
But if there was any disappointment to come in, is that I really wish at some point in this we could have gotten a little bit better clarity.
Yeah.
But we just couldn't achieve it. Close, but just couldn't do it.
So
this is where we're at, and that's, it gets us back in, it gets us voting, it gets us sharing, it gets us part of the community again.
Yeah. And
in time, I am sure that we will eventually be just like every other AA group in North America outside of Toronto, and that's that the only requirement for membership is the desire to quit drinking,
mm-hmm.
and that we are a group if we declare that we're a group.
So do you
and
think
we're not
that
affiliated.
If there is an agnostic group in Toronto, like Beyond Belief, that wants to read alternative steps, do you think that they're free to do that now without fearing retribution from the Intergroup?
Oh, I know that they can do that, and there won't be retribution.
Okay.
And if there is retribution, then there's a problem.
Gotcha.
But it's not, that's a given. But no, that won't happen. There won't be any retribution. I can't imagine that they would want to do that dance again.
Two other things I'd like to touch on, Larry, is number one, what do you think is going to come out of this for Alcoholics Anonymous in Canada and the United States and worldwide? And also, to finish up, how do you see reconciliation in Toronto?
Well, let's go back to the first part. The world is in flux and changing, and I mean we are in and have been for a long time in tumultuous times with some polarization over religious points of view and perspective. One of the things that's very clear in the United States, as well as in Canada, more so in Canada, is that there's been a more shift to the non-God position or the secular position, but certainly not a sectarian point of view. So now I would say that the sectarian points of view are probably more firm and more firm than they have been in recent history. But there is the fastest growing section is non-believers or non-conforming people,
right?
Whatever. And in Canada, it's a much larger. I think we're hitting close to 50%.
Wow.
When we talk about the young demo, which is important because they're about to start knocking on the door. And they are actually they are knocking on the door, and they're coming in, and they're attending meetings. So I think that if we want to, as a fellowship or a community, want to be open to actually helping, still suffering alcoholics, we have to look at everybody, especially in Canada, where we have 150, 160 different countries that have moved here, from all over the place, and we have to attend that. We have to be open to them. Not all will come, that's for sure. Not all will stay if they do come. But the point is, we have to be able to have the door open for them. Or we're just going to become old men and old women, and we're going to die off, and there's not going to be anybody here keeping the doors open.
Yeah.
So this is, I hope, changed that a bit, just to keep the door open, Took a bit of a crowbar this time, but that was always my aim with this, and I think that will help. And I think having it here in Toronto, I think that the tribunal system here in Ontario was probably the best venue in North America to not bankrupt anybody going through it.
Yeah, that's amazing. In the United States, this would have been billions of dollars, millions of dollars.
Exactly. And that actually, believe it or not, was part of my thinking. Is this is going to be a problem. This is here now. This is a much better place to have this dealt with.
Yeah, I like the system. It sounds like it's really accessible for the average citizen to just go in there and have their case heard.
Well, the province a long time ago moved towards making sure that we had extended some rights, and we feel very strongly about that in this country, and in particular in Ontario. So we've sort of led the world with that kind of thing. Tried to accommodate people,
Sure.
Try to make people, all feel welcome and all feel at home. So that it is a good system that way. There certainly are detractors, and I understand why. But most of the time, and this is certainly a circumstance where it's like that, it worked out very well for everybody. Because at the end of the day, Toronto Intergroup is not going to be closing its doors.
No.
And AA is not going to be, significantly injured.
But how do you think this is going to impact these intergroups that are still like Vancouver, right? Denver.
Well, if a complaint gets lodged, GSO has some tools that it didn't have before.
Right.
That it can exercise in terms of its communication with those organizations, and I think that those organizations might rethink their position.
Gotcha. So now GSO has experience to share that's probably a little bit more specific when these intergroups ask these questions. Okay.
I think they've created some new protocols, I would think. And, until something new and even more bizarre happens.
Yeah.
I think they'll be helpful. So that Denver might not do what Denver is doing, and Vancouver, which I've heard has declared itself as spiritual. You need spiritual requirements, your group.
Oh, really?
And I'm trying to figure that one out.
Uh-oh.
I don't know how does a group have a
you can't do that. That's not right.
I don't know. I don't know. I don't want to even go there.
No.
It's just it breathes and it's alive, because I think that's the root of spiritual is spiritus, right?
Well, I think that in my opinion, I think that this is going to open AA up, make it more inclusive, as you said, because it frees people's imagination. I mean, the steps aren't just stuck in time and that verbiage from the Oxford group. The steps are what how you as an individual interpret them to be. And I think that, gosh, if AA was really smart, they would allow, I mean, they do this already with any organization you step, but they would allow within Alcoholics Anonymous, they would encourage it for members and groups, if they want to write the steps however they want to do it, because the steps are not the words at all. They're once the steps are what I bring to the steps. Yeah,
it's what I bring to it that matters.
Absolutely. And
it's not about the other way around.
I love the steps because they are so rich, and like you and I have a common bond in them, but we experience them differently. And that's what's so weird about it, is that we have a similar process, but we have different experiences with that process, I guess.
Sure.
So my
Absolutely. You know what's really interesting? Just talking about that. When I take sponsees through the steps, I mean, often they want to be taken through the steps and find out what that's all about. You know, I don't tell them anything. I let them teach it to me. Yeah. And that to me requires that they have to read it. They can ask all the questions they want, and I'll answer it the best I can. But they then have to teach them to me, so that they have now bought ownership of their idea about what it is that they're doing. It doesn't matter what I say. Yeah. It matters what they think and what they feel. And you know what? It's very effective.
It is. In fact,
they get some mastery.
That's what, in the big book, it even actually says, ask yourself what the spiritual terms mean to you. That's what's important. So here's my final question for you. I look forward to coming to Toronto. I've never been there. There's got to be a lot of bad feelings within the Alcoholics Anonymous community in Toronto, I imagine. How do you see things coming together? How do you see reconciliation? Do you think it'll be an easy thing or not?
Well, I'm hoping that it'll be an easy thing. I think that there's going to be some bruised egos. There's going to be disagreement for a long time. People like to hold grudges because grudges feel good. They're very
Resentment is a number one offender.
People like to be angry.
Yeah, they do.
And this too shall pass.
Yeah, I think you're right.
So that's my thought. That's my thought on it. And then one day it will feel like it was 1950 ago when that happened.
Exactly. Well, I tell you, it's amazing.
I don't know when that'll be.
I think that this is really an important moment in AA history, and it's something that, people will be looking back on as a seminal moment where things kind of changed. I think that there's a future for Alcoholics Anonymous, and I think it's great. So thank you, Larry, for your courage and your persistence in doing what was right.
Well, you're more than welcome for that. But, I did do it for selfish reasons too. I have children and I have family. Yeah. And most of them may need the doors opened for them. Yeah. And, I actually take from Hillel, if not you, who, and if not now, when. These are thoughts, and I was the person standing there when those questions had to be asked, and the answer was, I guess that's me. Rats. So,
well, that's great.
It was worth it for my children.
Well, thank you.
Anyway, good talking to you, John. Thanks for inviting me to give you a call and a shout today.
Oh, it's wonderful for you to do that. I know you've been really busy, and thank you very, very much.
More than welcome, and I'm looking forward to seeing you at the next conference.
Okay. Take care.
All right,
okay,
bye-bye.
Well, that's it for another episode of AA Beyond Belief, the podcast. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll be back soon enough with another episode for your listening pleasure. Until then, don't drink, go to meetings, and help others.